Crack! The pen snapped in his hand. Black ink ran through his fingers. On the screen, the woman in silk was wrapping her arms around another man's neck right there in the middle of his own hall. Minutes ago, she'd been waving at the car, mouthing "I love you." The door closed and the smile went out. Like someone had cut the power. "He's gone. Come here." Now she said into the phone. Not his name. By now he was supposed to be flying to Sicily. The whole house believed it. But he was sitting here, in the dark behind the false wall of his own library. 6 screens throwing pale blue light across a face cold as stone, the man stepping out of the car at the gate. He'd bought that car himself. He didn't stand. He didn't shout. A man who moves too soon loses everything. He whispered to the glass, "Show me who you really are." Because 2 nights ago, his mother had taken his hand and told him something he'd prayed. His whole life wasn't true. The room behind the wall was small. Smaller than a rich man should ever need. 6 screens, 1 chair, a desk with nothing on it but a pen and a length of cold silence. Dominic Castellano sat in the dark, 45 years old, black suit, hands folded, and the pale blue light of the monitors moved across his face like water over a stone that had stopped feeling the current a long time ago. He was supposed to be in Sicily. That was the story. The one he'd told everyone. Old business with old men who still spoke his father's name like a prayer. He'd packed the bag. He'd kissed his fiancée on the forehead at the door. He'd climbed into the black car, and then 4 blocks out, he'd climbed back out, walked home through the service entrance, folded himself into this box behind the false wall of his own library because of his mother. Because 2 nights ago, in a room at the end of the hall, Rosalind had taken his hand in both of hers, her fingers shaking, not from fear, from the illness that was stealing her one small piece at a time. And she had looked at him with eyes that had buried a husband and raised a killer. "Watch how she treats me," his mother had whispered, "when she thinks no one is looking. That's her real face, my son." He hadn't wanted to believe it. God knows he tried not to, because he loved them. Or he thought he did. Camilla Ashford, heiress, beautiful, cold in a way he'd mistaken for grace. She'd walked into his life a year ago like she owned the floor she stood on. And he'd let her in. Him, the man who let nobody in, but his mother did not lie, not once, not in 45 years. So here he was, watching. The main screen showed the grand hall, marble, high ceilings. The chandelier his grandfather had shipped from the old country. And there she was, Camilla, standing at the front door in pale silk, waving at a car she thought was carrying him to the airport. He zoomed in. She was smiling. That smile, the one that had fooled him for a year. She lifted her hand, mouthed words at the closing door. He didn't need the sound to read them. "I love you. I'll miss you. Come back to me soon." 3 little lies, shaped by lips he had kissed 100 times. The door closed and Dominic watched the smile die, not fade. That's the thing about a real smile. It fades. It softens. It lingers a second too long because the warmth behind it is still there. This one didn't fade. It went out 1 breath, warmth. The next, nothing. A face gone flat and gray and patient. A face he had never seen in a full year of standing beside her. His stomach turned to stone because he knew that face. He'd seen it on men across poker tables, on rivals across boardrooms, on killers across empty parking lots at 3 in the morning. That was the face of someone playing a very long game. And he was the prize. Camilla reached into a hidden pocket in the silk, pulled out a phone. Her thumb moved fast. From memory, not from a saved contact. People memorize the numbers they need to hide. Dominic slid the audio up. Her voice filled the little room. "He's gone." A pause, finally. "Come here now, not darling, not my love, not Dominic." He was a thing, a door to walk through, a lock to pick. Something cold slid down his spine and pooled at the base of it. He didn't move, he wanted to. Every muscle in him wanted to stand up and walk out there and end it in one clean motion. But he'd learned the first rule of his world a long time ago. Anger is a luxury, and luxuries get you killed. So he stayed still, and he waited. He didn't check his watch. He didn't shift. He sat like a stone in a river and let the seconds run over him. His eyes never left the glass. Then a car pulled up to the gate, a black Audi. He knew that car because he'd bought that car, a Christmas gift, last December, for his finance manager, a bonus for a good year. Wrapped with a bow in the driveway while the snow came down soft and everyone drank hot wine and laughed and pretended the world was kind. The door opened and Julian Reeds stepped out. Julian, his numbers man, his trusted hand. The one who signed off on the accounts. The one who knew where every dollar of the Castellano fortune slept at night. Julian glanced left. Glanced right. The way a man glances when he's carrying a thing he'll answer for someday. Then he hurried up the steps and inside. Dominic switched cameras. Followed him into the hall. And what he saw next cracked something in his chest he thought had turned to rock years ago. Camilla ran to him. Ran, in heels, across marble. Like a girl running to a soldier off a train. She threw her arms around Julian's neck, and their mouths found each other with the kind of hunger that only comes from waiting. From holding back. From months of pretending in front of the man who paid for the roof over their heads. Right there, in the center of the grand hall. 6 feet from the exact spot where Dominic had gone down on one knee 6 months before. Where Camilla had pressed a hand to her mouth and cried and whispered that this was the happiest moment of her whole life. Lies, every tear, every whispered word. He'd bought a front row seat and clapped like a fool. His hand closed around the pen on the desk. Slowly, his knuckles went white, his jaw locked until he felt it in his temples, and if anyone had been in that dark little room to see his eyes, they would have looked away, because something was burning behind them. Low, blue, endless, the kind of fire that doesn't roar, the kind that just quietly turns everything to ash. But he didn't run out, not because he was weak, because a con artist never has just one secret, and he needed all of them. He drew a slow breath, pushed the fury down past his chest, down into the cold, deep place at the bottom of him where he kept the worst of what he was. And he whispered to the glass, "Show me everything, Camilla." His breath fogged in the cold air. "Show me who you really are." They moved to the living room after the kiss, the red velvet sofa. He'd ordered it from Italy, a birthday gift, for her. It had cost more than most men make in a year, and she was sitting on it now, folded into the arms of another man. Drinking his wine, Julian poured 2 glasses, handed her one, and there was a small mean worry on his face. "We have to be patient," Julian said, "after the wedding. Everything gets easier after the wedding." Camilla cut him off. "Patient?" A laugh with no warmth in it. "I am so sick of being patient." She stood, started pacing, wine sloshing in the glass. "A whole year," she said. "A whole year of playing the perfect little bride. Do you have any idea how exhausting that is? Smiling when I want to scream. Saying I love you when all I feel is disgust." She stopped, and the old woman, Dominic, went very still. "That sick old woman," Camilla said, "every single day. Like she matters. Like any of it matters." The pen bent in his fist. He didn't feel it. Camilla set her glass on the marble, straightened the silk, said she needed to blow off some steam, and her heels started tapping across the floor, sharp, steady, a metronome of something cruel. And she turned down the first-floor hall, toward the room at the very end, his mother's room. Dominic's heart began to pound. He switched cameras fast. Hall, then the interior. His fingers moving on instinct, because his mind had gone somewhere cold and narrow. Inside, a young woman was helping his mother sit up, brown hair tied back, simple clothes. She was handing Rosalind a glass of water and a small tray of morning pills, and she was saying something, soft. And his mother was smiling, a real one, on a face illness had carved and hollowed and dimmed. He didn't know the young woman's name. That was the truth of it, and it landed like a slap. He'd walked past her 100 times, 1,000, on the stairs, in the halls, and he had never once looked. She'd been a shadow to him, a pair of hands that kept his mother comfortable. Nameless, part of the furniture, and now the door to that room flew open. No knock. Camilla stepped in, and the whole room seemed to freeze. The young woman turned, and Dominic watched her face change. Not to fear exactly, to caution. The careful blankness of someone who has learned that showing what you feel gets you hurt. Camilla looked at her the way you look at a stain. "Get out," voice stripped bare. "I need to talk to her." Alone, the young woman hesitated. Her eyes went to Rosalind, checking, protecting. His mother gave a small nod. "It's all right." The young woman set the water down, lowered her head, and left. But Dominic watched on the hall camera as she stopped, just past the door, and leaned against the wall, and stayed. Listening, her hands twisting together. She was afraid, but she stayed. Something moved in his chest that he couldn't name. Inside the room, Camilla walked to the bed. "You think you're important, old woman," that voice. Nothing like the sugar she poured over him. This was the real one. Rosalind said nothing. She looked up with steady eyes. eyes that buried a husband and raised a killer and stared down worse than this. "You're an obstacle," Camilla said. "A burden. And after the wedding, you know what happens to you. I find the cheapest home I can, somewhere far, somewhere gray. Somewhere your precious son won't even bother to visit." She laughed. "Low and ugly. He's so blind. He actually believes I love him." Dominic's whole body shook. Camilla stepped to the bedside table, to the pill tray, and with one flick of her wrist, contempt made into emotion, she knocked the entire tray to the floor, pills scattered across the cold stone, rolling, skittering under the bed. "Into the corners, you don't need these," she said. "The sooner you go, the better." For everyone, Rosalind's eyes filled, but she did not beg. She had lived 70 years. She had seen every kind of person there is, and she knew a woman like Camilla wasn't worth one drop of a mother's dignity. "I pity you," Rosalind said, voice low, sorrowful. "You'll never know what real love is." For 1 second, Camilla flinched, just one. Like the words had reached in and touched something buried and rotten, and then her hand came up, and she slapped the old woman across the face. Not hard. Hard enough to leave a red mark on the wrinkled skin of a 70-year-old woman. "Save your pity for yourself," Camilla said, and turned, and walked out, leaving Rosalind alone in the wreckage. In the room behind the wall, the pen finally shattered. Black ink burst across Dominic's palm, ran between his fingers, dripped to the floor. Dark as the thing rising up in him, his whole body trembled, not from fear, from a rage he had not felt since they lowered his father into the ground. She put her hand, he whispered, "On my mother." The air in the little room seemed to freeze around the words, and still. Somehow, he did not move, because a man who moves too soon loses everything, and a man who waits gets to decide how it ends. The young woman waited until Camilla's heels had faded down the hall. Dominic watched her on the camera, watched her lower her eyes as Camilla swept past, making herself small. Camilla walked by her like she was a coat rack, like she was air. The moment the footsteps died, the young woman pushed the door open and went inside. And Dominic watched her stop cold at what she saw Rosalind on the bed. Tears on her cheeks, the red mark stark against pale skin, and the pills. Everywhere, scattered across the floor like spilled teeth. The young woman didn't say a word. She knelt on the cold stone, and she began to gather them. One by one, her fingers careful, and she wiped each pill clean on the hem of her blouse, checking each one, cracked, ruined. These were his mother's lifeline, the thin thread holding back the disease that wanted to take her whole. And this girl was picking them up like they were made of gold. Dominic watched, and the rage in him. The white-hot, blood-in-the-mouth rage. It didn't leave. But it made room for something else, something he didn't have a name for, because he was watching a mirror. Camilla had knocked those pills to the floor in a single second, with a flick of the wrist, out of contempt, and this girl was picking them up one by one, with devotion. Out of love, the contrast pinned him to the chair like a nail through the palm. When she had gathered them all, the young woman rose, got fresh water, came back to the bed, and helped his mother sit up, gently, slid another pillow behind Rosalind's back, so she could lean, so she could breathe. "Here," the girl said, soft. "Let me help you take these." Rosalind looked at her, and the old woman's eyes filled again, but different now. Not shame, not pain, something warmer, something that ached. She reached out and took the girl's hand. "My child," Rosalind whispered, voice trembling. "You shouldn't stay here, not for me. You should go. Leave this house." The girl shook her head, slow, certain. She tightened her grip on those old fingers. "You're my family," she said, "the only family I have left in this house. And I don't leave family." Rosalind broke into a quiet sob, and Dominic, in the dark, watched the woman he was going to marry get measured against the woman who cleaned up her cruelty. And there was no comparison. There had never been a comparison. He leaned toward the screen, and for the first time in a year of walking past her, he saw a servant, not a shadow, not furniture, a human being with a heart of gold, shining in the middle of a house built out of lies. And a question rose in him, a question that had nothing to do with money, or enemies, or war. "Who are you?" Her name was Wren Holloway. He learned it an hour later when Silas sent the file. Silas was the one man on this earth Dominic trusted with his life. 20 years at his side, quiet as a shadow, sharp as broken glass. And when Dominic had whispered into the phone, "Dig up everything on the caregiver," Silas had not asked why. The file came through in minutes. Wren Holloway, 27 years old. 2 years of employment in the Castellano house. Clean record. No debts of her own. Salary sent, almost the entire thing, to a hospital account in another state. A hospital account. Dominic frowned, and then he read further, and the frown became something else, because there was a note in the file, flagged in red. 2 years ago, when Wren applied for the position, she'd listed a reference, and the reference was strange. It wasn't a former employer. It was a name from the Castellano family's own past, Rosalind, his mother. Dominic sat back, because his mother had never mentioned knowing this girl. Not once. And that meant one of two things. Either it was a coincidence, or Wren Holloway had come to this house on purpose. He didn't like coincidences. In his world, a coincidence was just a trap you hadn't noticed yet. He watched her on the screen. She was reading to his mother now, a book open in her lap. Her voice too low for the audio to catch, and Rosalind's eyes were closed, her face soft, listening. Who are you, Wren Holloway? And what do you really want? That night, the mansion sank into sleep, and Dominic did not. He sat in the room behind the wall and watched the small screen in the corner. The one that showed a cramped little room in the basement. Staff quarters, smaller than Camilla's bathroom, a single bed, a battered table, a wardrobe that had seen better decades, and Wren Holloway sat on the edge of the bed, holding a photograph. The audio was faint. A cheap bedside lamp threw yellow light across her tired face. She was looking at the photo like it was the only thing left in the world, and Dominic zoomed the camera. Slow, careful, because some part of him felt like a thief for doing it. The photograph showed a little girl, maybe 8. Gap-toothed grin, 2 neat braids, eyes bright as a struck match. Wren touched the photo with one finger, and then she picked up her phone and dialed. A voice came through. Weak, male. Young. Hey sis, hey Owen. Wren's voice cracked and she pushed it steady. How are you feeling today? I'm okay. Don't worry about me. How's the job? Wren smiled, even though he couldn't see it, even though it cost her everything. Everything's fine, she said. I'll come see you this weekend. I promise. Okay. A pause. And then, so quiet Dominic almost missed it. I miss you, sis. I miss you too, Owen. Get some rest. She sat in the dark, and the smile slid off her face like water off glass, and she began to cry, without a sound. The way a person cries when they've learned that no one is coming. Shoulders shaking, one hand pressed to her mouth. Years of practice in that silence. In the room behind the wall, Dominic Castellano did not move. His system had caught the whole call. Every word, every muffled sob, and for the first time in a very long while, the heart of the coldest man in New York tightened with a pain that wasn't his own. Not because of Camilla, not because of the betrayal, because a girl was carrying an entire world on shoulders too small for it, and crying alone, in a room the size of a coffin, in his house, under his roof, and he had never even known her name. He wanted to walk out of the room. He wanted to go down there. He wanted to knock on that door and tell her she wasn't alone, but he couldn't, not yet. He stared at her image on the glass. What have you been through? He whispered. How is someone so broken still shining that bright? The next morning the game continued. He let the black car circle the block again, keeping the story alive that he was gone, and Camilla played her part. She rose late, she ate a slow breakfast, and then she went to check on the old woman, a new cruelty she'd begun to enjoy. Making sure the burden was fading, making sure the medicine was going untaken, except it wasn't. Camilla opened the pillbox on the bedside table and counted, and her face went hard because the count was down. By exactly the right dose, someone had defied her, someone had dared, and it did not take her long to guess who. That afternoon, Wren was kneeling by the bed, working the blood back into his mother's stiff legs, muscles the illness had turned to stone, a skill she'd taught herself out of library books so she could care for Rosalind better. And his mother's eyes were closed, her face loose with a rare quiet comfort. The door slammed open. Wren, startled, turned, and Camilla stood there, face like frost, eyes on fire. She stepped inside, shut the door behind her, and walked toward Wren with slow, deliberate steps. You gave her the medicine, didn't you? Wren rose to her feet, and here is where Dominic leaned forward, because the girl did not run, and she did not look away. She stood there, small and steady, and she looked Camilla in the eye. Rosalind needs her medication, Wren said. It's my job to care for her, no tremor in it. Camilla laughed. Thin, cold, and then, with no warning, Her hand came up and cracked across Ren's face. The sound split the quiet room like a whip. Ren's head snapped sideways. Her cheek went red. And when she brought her eyes back, there was blood at the corner of her mouth where her lip had split against her teeth. "You're a servant," Camilla hissed, her fingers stabbing the air. "Know your place." On the bed, Rosalind made a small broken sound, tried to speak. Camilla whipped around and glared her into silence. And in the room behind the wall, Dominic came out of his chair, his whole body wire-tight, every instinct in him screaming, "Go. Get out there. Put your body between them." But Silas's voice came through the earpiece, low. "Steady, not yet, boss. We need it all. Just a little more." Dominic's teeth ground together. His nails cut into his palm until blood welled up, but then he looked back at the screen, and what he saw stopped him cold. Ren did not cry. She did not step back. She did not bow her head. She lifted a hand to her burning cheek, and she looked straight into Camilla's eyes. And in that brown gaze was something Camilla had clearly never seen in a servant before. Something that would not break. "Hit me if you want," Ren said. "Quiet. Even I won't hit you back. But I won't stop caring for her, either." Camilla actually took a step back because she was used to fear, used to heads dropping, used to power doing its work without a word. And this girl wasn't afraid of her. "I've been hit before," Ren said. "By people far worse than you. It didn't break me then. It won't break me now." Camilla had no answer for that. She wasn't built to understand it. You cannot understand a strength like that if you've never had to survive anything, and Camilla had never survived anything. She had only ever taken. "You'll regret this," she managed. "After the wedding, you're the first thing I throw out of this house." Ren nodded. Not shaken. "Then I'll take care of her until that day comes." Camilla turned and walked out and slammed the door. On the bed, Rosalind was crying. Not from fear. From pride. "That girl," his mother whispered, to the empty room, to God. "That girl has more courage than anyone I've ever known." In the dark, Dominic sank slowly back into his chair. Blood dripped from his palm to the floor. He didn't feel it. The only pain he felt was in his chest, a sharp, twisting thing that stabbed every time he looked at the red mark on Ren's cheek. He lifted the earpiece to his mouth, and his voice, when it came, was quiet with a storm underneath. "Silas, if she lays a hand on that girl one more time, I don't need more proof. I'll end it myself." Silence on the line, then carefully. "Understood, boss," because Silas had learned, over 20 years, exactly which words his boss did not say lightly. And he understood in that moment that something had shifted, that Dominic had just placed a caregiver, a nameless girl, a shadow in a big house, on the same shelf as his own mother, in the small guarded circle of people he would burn the world to protect. That night, Camilla and Julian found each other again in the living room. They didn't know about the cameras in the corners. They didn't know that every word they said was pouring straight into the ears of the man they were plotting to bury. Dominic watched Julian open his leather briefcase, watched him slide a stack of documents onto the marble. "The prenuptial agreement," Julian said. "Revised. I made sure of it. After the wedding, if there's a divorce, you walk away with 60%. Camilla frowned. "Divorce is too slow," she said. "What about the other plan?" Julian's voice dropped, even though the room was empty. Some instinct in a guilty man always makes him whisper. "The problem is the old woman. As long as she's alive and lucid, she can still get in his ear, still change his mind. We need her declared incompetent. There's a doctor. He can be paid." Camilla nodded, and a slow, poisonous smile spread across her face. "Good. Once she's declared incompetent, we move her. Somewhere quiet, out of sight, out of his mind." Dominic's blood began to boil, but he held. He kept listening. He needed all of it. "And then what?" Julian asked, greed thick in his voice. Camilla leaned in close. "Then we wait. A year, maybe 2, until he trusts me completely. And when the moment's right," she gave a small, cold laugh. "Accidents happen all the time." The words went down Dominic's spine like ice water. She didn't just want his money. She wanted him dead. Julian laughed too. And then he began to report, like a soldier to a general. He'd already moved part of the fortune, an account overseas, millions so far. Dominic hadn't noticed. Julian had forged the signature on the transfer papers so that when it all broke open, they'd already have enough to vanish. To start over somewhere far. Somewhere no one would ever find them. Camilla kissed him on the cheek. "A reward. A treat for the dog. A few more years," she murmured, "and we'll have everything, his money, our freedom, and a life somewhere he'll never haunt us." And Dominic, she smiled. Dominic will have nothing. No money, no mother, no life. In the room behind the wall, Dominic Castellano sat very, very still. Everything he'd just heard hit him like cold water in the face. And at the same time, like a match to the last dry scrap of illusion, he'd been carrying about the woman he'd planned to marry. He had known about the betrayal. He had known about the cruelty. But he had not known it ran this deep, this cold, this far. They didn't just want to rob him. They wanted to erase his mother, and then erase it, and walk away in the sun with everything he'd bled to build. He stared at the screen, where they were still laughing, still drawing their little map of a future that would never come, and slowly, a smile rose on his lips. Not a smile of pleasure, the smile of a wolf, watching prey walk deeper into a trap it can't see, patient, cold. A promise of the storm that was coming. "I want to play games," he said softly, with a Castellano. He picked up the phone. "Silas, dig deeper. I don't want the 60% story. I want who she is, where she came from, the day she was born to the day she walked into my house. I want to know exactly who I've been sleeping next to." On it, Silas said. Dominic hung up, and he turned back to the screens, to the two of them, warm and stupid and certain, planning a life on the grave of a man who was already 3 steps ahead. They thought they held every card. They thought Dominic was the fool at the table, the mark, the lamb. They were wrong. And in Dominic Castellano's world, traitors only ever got one ending. He looked at the small screen in the corner, at the basement room where a single lamp still glowed, where a girl with a split lip and a heart of gold was bent over the table, writing something, pouring herself onto the page, and something in the ice around his heart, something frozen a very long time, began very quietly to crack. Dominic couldn't read the letter from that angle, not yet. But he watched Wren fold it, watched her hands shake as she creased the paper, watched her slide it into the dark of the drawer and push it shut, and then sit there still, staring at nothing. The way a person stares when they've made peace with something terrible. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the room behind the wall and thought about a hospital account in another state, and a reference that was his own mother's name, and a girl who took a slap without flinching but cried herself dry over a phone call. Nothing about her added up, and Dominic Castellano did not like things that didn't add up. So the next morning he called Silas, and he said one word: everything. The file came back in pieces over the course of the day, and piece by piece, it built a picture that Dominic hadn't been ready for. Wren Holloway, born 27 years ago in a mill town that had already started dying by the time she arrived. Father a laborer, mother a ghost, 2 younger siblings. He read it slow because some stories you have to read slow, or they knock you down. She was 10 when her mother left. No goodbye. No note worth the name. Just an empty closet and a crumpled scrap of paper with 6 words on it. "I'm sorry. I can't do this." And then the woman who gave her life simply walked out the front door and out of the world, 10 years old. And the father couldn't take it. Or maybe he'd been broken long before that, and losing his wife just cracked the last thing holding him together. He found the bottle, and the bottle found the worst version of him. And when he drank, the rage in him needed somewhere to go, so it went to the children. Dominic read the medical records Silas had pulled, old ones. A broken wrist at 11, a concussion at 12. Explained away every time. She fell. She's clumsy. Kids, you know, kids, and Dominic. A man who had done violence with his own hands. A man who did not flinch at much of anything. Felt something turn over in his gut and go sour, because he could see it. He didn't want to, but he could. A 10-year-old girl standing between a drunk man and 2 smaller children, taking the belt, taking the fist, so they wouldn't have to. The father died when Wren was 15. Liver gave out. Left behind nothing but debt and 3 kids who didn't know what they'd eat the next day. 15. She dropped out of school and she went to work. Every job that would take a girl with no diploma and a desperate face. Dishes, cleaning offices at night, hauling boxes, anything that paid. She fed her little brother and her little sister on tips and scraps and sheer will, and she never complained. That was the thing that stayed with him. In every record and note and flagged line, there was not one complaint, not one plea, just a girl doing what had to be done because 2 smaller people were counting on her. Then, when she was 17, the little sister got sick. Dominic already knew where this was going. He'd seen the photograph, the gap-toothed grin, the braids. But knowing didn't make it easier. leukemia, and Ren, 17 years old, with nothing in her hands but calluses. Ran everywhere, begged everyone, borrowed from people who had nothing to lend, worked until she couldn't stand, but the bills were mountains, and she was one small girl at the bottom of them, the little sister, Josie. Died in Ren's arms on a winter night, 8 years old. Silas had included the hospital note. Cold, clinical, time of death, cause. But there was a line at the bottom added by some nurse who'd been there that had no business in a medical file and was the truest thing in it. Patient's older sister would not let go of the body for 3 hours. Dominic put the phone down and sat in the dark and did not move for a long time because he understood now. The salary going to a hospital, the reference. The way she picked up those pills like they were made of gold. The way she looked at his mother and called her family. She'd already watched one person she loved die for lack of money. And she had sworn to God it would never happen again. The rest of the story he pieced together from the newest records. 5 years after Josie died, the younger brother got sick. Owen, the weak voice on the phone, the one who said, "I miss you." Sis, kidney failure. The same fear. The same mountain of bills. The same girl at the bottom of it, except this time, Ren was older and harder, and she had made herself a promise carved in stone, not again. Whatever it takes. Whatever I have to eat, whatever I have to swallow, I do not lose another one, and that was why she was here, because the Castellano house paid more than any other job in the country would pay a girl with no diploma. Enough to keep Owen on the transplant list. Enough to cover the drugs, the dialysis, the endless bleeding costs of a body trying to fail. She would endure Camilla's contempt. She would live in a room the size of a closet. She would take the slaps, as long as the money went to Owen, as long as Owen lived. But there was still the reference, the one thing that didn't fit. Rosalind's name on an application 2 years old. And Dominic realized there was only one way to understand it. He'd have to ask the one person who'd know. So that afternoon, while Camilla slept off her wine, he did something he had not done since he'd hidden himself away. He left the room behind the wall, and he went to see his mother. He knocked twice, soft, and stepped inside. And the moment Rosalind saw him, her whole face broke open. "You're home," she whispered, and held out her arms, both of them shaking. He crossed the room and folded himself into them, and for 1 second, one single second, he was not a mafia boss. He was a boy who'd climbed into his mother's bed on the nights the world got too loud. Before the bullets, before the empire, before the ice. He put his mouth close to her ear. "I know everything, Mom," he whispered. "I've seen it all." She pulled back and looked at him, and there was no surprise in her face. "None. Then you know what you have to do," she said. Steadier than she'd sounded in months. He nodded, but there was something else. And Rosalind, who had known him his whole life, saw it before he said a word. "You want to ask me about Ren," she said. Dominic went still. "How did you? A mother knows." She smiled, faint and tired. "You have the same look you had at 7. When you wanted to ask something you were afraid of the answer to, he sat on the edge of the bed, and for a moment he didn't know how to begin. Which was new. He always knew how to begin. "She listed you as a reference," he said finally. 2 years ago, on her application. I never heard you mention her. So either it's a lie, or I knew her before." Rosalind's eyes went soft and distant. "It's not a lie." Dominic waited. His mother looked at her hands, and when she spoke, her voice had gone somewhere far away. 3 years ago, she said. "Before the worst of this took hold. I still went out then. Do you remember? A driver would take me to the pharmacy. The one on the corner by the old church," he remembered. "There was a girl there one afternoon, at the counter, trying to buy medicine for her brother. And she was short. Just a little. Just a few dollars. And the pharmacist, he wasn't going to give it to her." Rosalind's mouth tightened. She wasn't crying. That's what I noticed. A girl that desperate, and she wasn't crying. She was just standing very still, trying to figure out which pill she could put back. Which one her brother could live without for another week. Dominic didn't move, so I paid it, Rosalind said, simply. Like it was nothing. The difference. It was a small thing. I barely remember the amount. I told her to take the whole prescription, and I got in my car, and I went home, and I forgot about it. Because it was small, and my life was full of other things. She looked up at her son, but she didn't forget. The room was very quiet. 2 years ago, when she applied for the position, I didn't recognize her name. Why would I? But she recognized this house. She'd asked around. She knew whose mother needed care, and she came here. On purpose. Rosalind's eyes filled. Not to take anything, my son, to give it back. She told me, months in. One night when I was low and couldn't sleep. She held my hand and she said, "You paid for my brother's medicine once, when you didn't have to, and you never even asked my name. So let me pay you back. Let me take care of you the way you took care of him." Dominic sat with that for a long time, because it turned everything over, everything he'd suspected, every trap he'd assumed. The coincidence that wasn't a coincidence after all. It wasn't a con, it wasn't an angle, it was gratitude. A girl who'd been given one small kindness by a stranger, and had spent 2 years repaying it, in the dark, for no reward, taking slaps for it, bleeding for it, while the woman he'd nearly married knocked his mother's pills to the floor and laughed. "She never told me," he said, quietly, "any of it." "No," said Rosalind. "She wouldn't." "That's not why she does it." His mother reached out and took his hand. "That girl doesn't do good so someone will see. She does it because there's nothing else in her worth keeping if she doesn't." Dominic looked toward the door, and something in his chest that had been frozen a very long time shifted. Just slightly, just enough to feel it. "There's one more thing you should know," Rosalind said. He turned back. "That woman out there, Camilla." His mother's face hardened. "She's not who she says she is. I've felt it for months. It's not just cruelty. It's something older than that. Something practiced." She squeezed his hand. "Find out who she really is, Dominic, before that wedding, or she'll bury us both." He looked at his mother, 70 years old, shaking. Half her body slowly being stolen from her, and still. "Sharper than every soldier he had. I already have someone on it," he said. Silas called that night, and his voice was wrong. Dominic knew Silas's voice the way he knew his own heartbeat. 20 years, flat calm through gunfire. Flat calm through funerals. "And right now it was not flat calm, boss," Silas said. "You need to sit down for this one." "I'm sitting. Camilla Ashford doesn't exist." Dominic frowned. "Say that again. The woman in your house. The one you were going to marry. She's not Camilla Ashford. Camilla Ashford is real. Or she was. She died 5 years ago. Car accident. Somewhere in Europe." The floor seemed to tilt. Dominic said nothing. He let Silas keep talking. "The Ashfords were rich," Silas said, "but private. Recklesses. The kind of old money that never shows its face. When the daughter died overseas, they didn't announce it. They kept it quiet. Grief, pride, both. Almost nobody knew. And the woman in my house, her real name is Camilla Vos." Dominic closed his eyes. "Born in a bad part of Chicago," Silas went on. "Father was a con man, professional, grifts, forgeries, long games, and he taught her, from the time she was a little girl, how to forge a document, how to slip into someone else's skin, how to look at a person and find the exact soft place to push." Something cold and clarifying settled over Dominic. 5 years ago, Silas said, she found out about the real Camilla Ashford, that she'd died, that nobody knew. And she saw an opening, so she took it. The name, the papers, the whole history. She studied the Ashford family until she knew them better than they knew themselves. And then she showed up in New York. The heiress, back from years abroad. And because the Ashfords never went out, never let anybody near, there was almost no one alive who could say what the real Camilla even looked like. Dominic opened his eyes. And on the screen in front of him in the living room, the woman who called herself Camilla Ashford sat scrolling through her phone, carefree, perfect. A mask 5 years in the making. She had no idea that the mask had just come off, that across the house, behind a false wall, a man was looking at her true face for the first time. "You still there, boss? I'm here." A bitter taste climbed Dominic's throat because he was a Castellano, a man who'd survived 100 wars in the dark, a man who trusted almost no one, and he'd been fooled by a professional, wearing the face of an heiress. He'd slept beside her, he'd proposed to her, he'd planned to make her the mother of his children, and it had all been a performance, staged, rehearsed, aimed at his money, and in the end aimed at his life. "She's not just greedy," Dominic said slowly, each word carved out of stone. "She's a professional. I've got enough," Silas said. "The Vos file. Fingerprints that don't match the Ashford records. Suspicious transfers. All of it. Say the word and I move." Dominic looked at the screen. "This isn't betrayal anymore," he said. "This is war, and I've never lost one." He stood. Walked to the monitors. Looked down at the woman in the living room. "I want her finished, Silas. Completely. Nothing left to hide behind. No door left open. Nowhere in this city or any city we touch. She chose to play with fire. He let out a breath. So let her burn. But it wasn't only Camilla with a plan, because that same evening, something happened that Dominic almost missed. Julian Reed came back to the house late, after Camilla had gone to bed, and he went into the study, alone. And he thought he was alone. He wasn't. There was a camera in the study. There were cameras in every room of that house, and had been for years, because a man like Dominic did not build a fortress and leave holes in it. And Dominic watched Julian sit down at the desk and pull out his phone and start copying files onto a small drive. Documents, transfer records, photographs, the very evidence of the crimes he and Camilla had committed together. And Dominic frowned, because a man doesn't copy the evidence of his own crimes, unless he's planning to use it against someone. Julian worked fast, nervous, sweating even in the cool room, and when he was done, he made a call. Voice low. "It's me," Julian whispered. "I've got everything, every transfer." Her voice on the phone. Enough to sink her 10 times over. A pause. "No, she doesn't know. She thinks it's all for her." Another pause. "Because I'm not going down for that woman. When this cracks open, and it will, I want a card to play. She thinks she's running this. She thinks I'm her dog." A cold little laugh. "I'm nobody's dog." Dominic sat back, and a slow, grim understanding spread through him, because the two people plotting to destroy him weren't even loyal to each other. Julian was building a case against Camilla, to save himself, to trade her in when the walls came down. There was no honor at all in the thing they'd built, just two rats, each one waiting for the other to sink first. And Dominic, watching, felt the corner of his mouth lift, because this changed things. Two enemies who trust each other are dangerous. Two enemies who don't, who are each secretly ready to betray the other. Those you can take apart with a whisper. He picked up the phone. Silas. "Julian's got a drive. Copies of everything. He's planning to turn on Camilla to save his own neck." He paused. "Good. Let him keep thinking he's clever. When the time comes, I want him to reach for that card, and I want it to be the last mistake he ever makes." "Understood, boss." The next afternoon, Camilla started to feel it, the way a predator feels another predator in the dark, because she wasn't stupid. 5 years of running a con teaches you to smell a threat before you can see it. And there was a threat in this house. She was sure of it now, because the caregiver was always there, always near the old woman, always present the moment Camilla walked into that room, like she was guarding something, or listening for something. And Camilla did not like being listened to. So that afternoon, when Rin came down the first-floor hall carrying a dinner tray, Camilla was waiting. She stepped out of a shadowed corner, fast, before Rin could react. Camilla had her by the collar and slammed her back against the wall. The tray hit the floor, china shattered. Food spread across the marble. Camilla didn't even look at it. "I know you've been listening," she hissed, her face inches from Ren's. "What have you been telling that old woman?" Ren kept her voice level, even as her heart slammed against her ribs. "I don't know what you mean," Camilla smiled. "Thin, cold, terrible, don't play dumb with me." She leaned closer. "I have connections, Ren Holloway. I know things. I know about your brother Owen. Isn't it? Kidney failure. Waiting on a transplant list." Ren went rigid. Her eyes went wide, and Camilla saw it. The exact soft place. The thing her father had taught her to find in every person alive. The one thing they could not bear to lose. "There it is," Camilla whispered. "Leave him out of this," Ren said. And for the first time, her voice cracked. "Or what?" Camilla tilted her head. "See, here's how it works. That transplant list. Those things can be adjusted. Names can be moved. Names can disappear. I know people who owe me favors. And your brother," she smiled, "your brother could wait a very long time. Long enough to die waiting, all because his sister couldn't keep her mouth shut." Ren trembled. Not with fear for herself. She'd stopped fearing for herself years ago. But Owen. Pale, thin Owen, lying in a hospital bed. Owen, who said, "I miss you, sis." Owen, the last one. "The only one left, please," Ren said. And it broke something in Dominic watching, because he had never heard her say that word. Not once. In everything he'd seen, she'd taken a slap without begging. She'd faced down this woman without flinching. And now she was saying, "Please, please," Ren said again. "Leave my brother alone. I'll do whatever you want. Just leave him out of it." Camilla let go of her collar, stepped back, and looked at her with something like triumph. "Then keep your mouth shut," she said. "Not one word, to anyone, about anything. Or I make one phone call, and your brother becomes a name that quietly slides down a list until it slides right off the bottom. She turned and walked away, her heels tapping down the hall, leaving Ren alone against the wall, shaking, surrounded by broken china and food. In the room behind the wall, Dominic Castellano was on his feet. The fury in him was a live thing now. It wanted out. It wanted to walk down that hall and put its hands around a lying throat. But he held, because it was almost time. And when he moved, he would move once, and it would be final, and nothing she said or did would matter ever again. He watched Ren on the screen slowly sink down against the wall and begin with shaking hands to gather the broken china, to clean up a mess someone else had made. Because that was all she'd ever been allowed to do. Clean up other people's messes and carry other people's weight and ask for nothing. And Dominic pressed his hand flat against the cold glass of the monitor, as if he could reach through it, as if he could reach her. "One more day," he whispered. "One more day, and it's over." That night, Ren couldn't sleep. Dominic watched her on the small screen. She lay on the narrow bed in the basement, staring up at the black ceiling, and her mind was clearly a storm. Because he could see it in her body, in the way she couldn't lie still. She was caught between two knives. Stay silent and betray the old woman who'd become her mother, or speak up and murder her own brother by proxy, an impossible choice. The kind life only hands to people who've already suffered too much. She sat up and turned on the lamp and took out a sheet of paper and a pen, and she began to write. Dominic watched her hand move across the page, slow, careful, every word costing her something. And this time he zoomed the camera slow, careful, feeling again like a thief, but he had to know. What is worth writing the night before a woman might destroy you? The camera found the page. The handwriting crooked and raw. "Dear Rosalind, if anything happens to me, I need you to know something. You are the mother I never had. Caring for you was never a job. It was the honor of my life. Please be strong. Please don't let her win by letting her take your light too. I love you. Whatever happens, I love you." Renan Dominic Castellano, the man who hadn't cried since they carried his father's coffin through the rain. The man who'd built an empire out of not feeling things, felt the corners of his eyes go hot because he hadn't cried when he learned Camilla was betraying him. He hadn't cried when he heard her plan to kill him, but he cried now, reading the last letter of a broken girl, preparing for her own death. And even then, even at the edge of it, thinking only of the love she wanted to leave behind for someone else, he wiped his face with the back of his hand, roughly, almost angry at himself for it, and then he sat very still, and something in him, some final wall, came down for good. "Enough," he whispered. He picked up the phone. "Silas, change of plan. We were going to wait 3 more days. We're not waiting. We move tomorrow." A pause on the line. "Tomorrow, boss. We're not fully set for tomorrow." Dominic's voice was iron. "I am not letting her live one more day under this roof afraid. I am not letting that girl write one more goodbye. Get everything ready. Every man, every paper, the voice file, all of it. Tomorrow night, I come home." "Understood." Dominic hung up, and he looked one last time at the small screen, at Ren, folding her letter, sliding it into the drawer, turning off the lamp, lying back in the dark, alone still, thinking she was alone. And Dominic leaned toward the screen and spoke to her, even though she couldn't hear him, even though a wall and a house and a lifetime stood between them. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "You just don't know it yet." He turned off the monitors, one by one, the room going dark. "Tomorrow," he said to the darkness, "tomorrow, everyone in this house finds out exactly who I am, and exactly who you are, and exactly what happens to people who mistake kindness for weakness." He sat in the black room for a long moment, the wolf, done watching, ready at last to move. Morning came gray over the Castellano mansion, 3 days ahead of the schedule Silas had set. 3 days before anyone in that house expected to see the master again, and with it came the low growl of an engine on the stone drive, Dominic's Rolls-Royce, black as a hearse, rolling through the gates while the first light of day was still soft on the garden. Inside, in the dining room, Camilla was eating breakfast with Julian. They'd gotten bold. That's the thing about people who think they've already won. They stopped being careful. They'd stopped hiding weeks ago. They ate together in the open now, laughed together in the open, because in their heads, the master of the house was in Sicily, and there were still days and days before he'd walk back through that door. Then Camilla heard the engine, and her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She rose, crossed to the window, looked down into the courtyard, and the blood drained out of her face like water down a drain. "It's him," she breathed. "He's back." "He's back early." Julian shot to his feet so fast he knocked his coffee across the table. "What? How? He's not supposed to hide." Camilla spun toward him, panic blazing in her eyes. "Out the back now." "Go." Julian didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his jacket off the chair and bolted for the rear door and vanished into the back garden in the space of a breath. Camilla stood alone in the dining room, and she drew a long, slow breath because she'd been acting for a year. She could act for another 10 minutes. She smoothed her hair, straightened the silk of her robe, pushed the panic down and out of her face, and slid the mask back into place. The soft one, the loving one, the one she'd built over 5 years and worn to perfection. The front door opened, and Dominic walked in dark gray suit, black hair combed back. To anyone watching, he looked like a businessman home from a trip. A man returning to the woman he loved. They would not have seen the thing underneath. Holding back a fury that could burn the world to the ground, Camilla flew to him. "My love," her voice bright, her smile flawless. "You're back so early. I missed you so much." She threw her arms around his neck, kissed his cheek, a perfect imitation of a woman in love, and Dominic let her. He put his hands around her waist, the way he always had, and he smiled. And if she had been just a little sharper, just a little less certain of her own genius, she might have felt that the arms holding her had gone cold, that the smile never once reached his eyes. "I couldn't stay away," Dominic said. Voice sweet as honey, cold as a grave to anyone who knew how to listen. "Sicily was boring without you." Camilla exhaled with relief. She'd bought it. All of it. She saw a fiancé home early. Still in love, still blind, still hers. Dominic kissed her forehead, a gesture he'd made 100 times, but this time, while his lips rested against her skin, his eyes moved, past her, to the rear door. The one Julian had just fled through, and that gaze was ice in a blade and a promise. They went into the living room, and Camilla played the part of the perfect bride-to-be. Attentive, warm, asking about his trip, the meetings, the weather, the old men he'd seen. And Dominic answered every question, with the calm of a man who'd been lying his whole life and was very, very good at it. He described meetings that never happened, meals he'd never eaten, streets he'd never walked, because he'd never left. But she didn't know that. She sat there and drank it in and believed every word, because she wanted to, because that's the great flaw in every con artist. They're so busy watching for the lie in you, they never think to look for it in the man they've decided is a fool. "This afternoon," Dominic said, setting down coffee. "I have an idea." Camilla tilted her head. "Oh, a dinner. Tonight. A family dinner. You, me, my mother." He smiled. "And Ren." Camilla's face flickered just for a second. Irritation, quickly hidden. "Ren," she said it light. Casual. "She's a caregiver, my love. Why would we? She took very good care of my mother while I was gone." Dominic's voice was smooth. "I want to thank her. And besides," he looked at Camilla, "she's practically family now." Camilla swallowed her anger. She hated the girl, hated her steady eyes and her unbowed head, and the way she'd stood there and taken a slap and not broken. But the wedding was weeks away. She couldn't refuse him. Not now. "Not over a servant, of course, my love," she said, and she smiled her sweetest smile. That sounds wonderful. She had no idea that the dinner wouldn't be a dinner, it would be a trial. That afternoon, while Camilla slept off her breakfast wine, Dominic went to the room at the end of the hall. He knocked, soft, and stepped inside, and his mother's face lit up like sunrise, and Ren was there beside her, a book in her hands. Looking up in surprise, Rosalind reached out her arms. "My son." He crossed the room and held her. "It's today, Mom," he whispered. "It ends today." She pulled back, looked into his eyes, and there was no fear there, only relief, and an unshakable faith in the son she'd raised. "Then do what you have to do," she said. He nodded, and then he turned to Ren. She was standing in the corner, and Dominic looked at her, really looked, and he saw the bruise on her arm, where Camilla had grabbed her and slammed her into the wall, and the faint marks still on her cheek, marks he'd watched appear through a camera, and was now seeing with his own 2 eyes. His chest tightened. "Ren," he said, and his voice came out gentler than she had ever heard it. "Would you step into the hall with me?" Just for a moment, she looked up, startled. Her eyes went to Rosalind, asking. Rosalind nodded with a small, comforting smile. "Go on, dear. It's all right." Wren followed him out into the empty hall, her heart pounding, because she didn't know why the master of the house wanted her alone, and 1,000 terrible possibilities were blooming in her mind. Had Camilla said something? Was she being fired? And Owen? God. What about Owen? Dominic turned to face her. He knew she couldn't tell him what had happened. He knew the threat was sitting on her chest like a stone. So he wanted to hear it from her anyway. Not because he needed the words, because he needed her to know she could say them. Tell me what happened while I was gone. Wren lowered her head. Her shoulders trembled. I can't, Mr. Castellano, barely a whisper. Thick with fear. Please, please don't ask me that. Because she was thinking of Camilla's threat. Of Owen dying on a list, of a name that slides quietly down and off the bottom. She couldn't force out a single word. Dominic looked at the trembling girl, and something in him broke open the rest of the way. He lifted his hand, slow, gentle, and with one finger he tipped her chin up, so she had to meet his eyes. You don't have to be afraid anymore, his voice, tender in a way it had not been with a living soul in a very long time. I know what she did. I know she threatened you. Wren froze. Her eyes went wide. You know, I saw everything. His gaze never left hers. Every slap, every word, every tear. I know you cried alone in that room. I heard you on the phone with your brother. I know about Owen. I know about Josie, and at the sound of her sister's name. The name no one in this house had ever spoken. The name she'd carried alone for 10 years. Wren broke. The tears came all at once, like a dam finally giving way. Because for a decade she had carried all of it alone, fought all of it alone, cried in the dark where no one saw and no one knew. And now someone knew. Now someone was standing on her side. Dominic raised his hand and wiped the tears from her cheek with his thumb. No one is going to hurt you again, Wren, he said. I promise you that. Not while I'm still breathing. And Wren looked into his eyes. And for the first time in her whole hard life, she saw something she had never seen in another human being. Real protection, with no price on it, no conditions, no demands, just a promise, from a man who was ready to stand between her and the entire world. The dining room had been dressed like a room for kings. White candles under the crystal chandelier, their flames throwing gold across walls of deep red. White roses in a crystal vase at the center of the long table. Bottles of red wine from the Castellano cellar, older than the people about to drink them. Silver polished to mirrors. Napkins folded with a precision that bordered on prayer. Everything perfect, and yet the air in the room was heavy. The way the air goes heavy before a storm. Like every person in it could feel that something terrible was coming, and none of them could name it. Dominic sat at the head of the table, in the chair his father had sat in for so many years. Black suit, collar open, elegant and dangerous all at once. His face calm in a way that was almost frightening. A still lake with something with teeth moving underneath. Camilla sat at his right, in a tight red dress meant to remind him what he was marrying. She tried to wear her usual smile, but there was an unease in her eyes she couldn't quite bury, and across from her sat Julian Reed. Which was the thing eating at her most, because Dominic had invited Julian to stay. Said he wanted to thank the man for handling the finances so well while he was away, and Julian couldn't refuse. So he sat there, rigid as a fence post, sweat beading on his forehead, in a dining room cool with air conditioning. Rosalind sat in her wheelchair at the far end, silent, watching everything with the clear eyes of a woman who knew exactly what a trap looked like. She knew what was coming tonight, and she was ready. And Wren stood near the wall, in her simple uniform, ready to serve the way she always did. But before she could pour a single glass, Dominic spoke. Wren, sit down. It wasn't a request. She blinked, confused. But I need to serve, sir. Dominic shook his head. Tonight, you're a guest. Sit. Camilla couldn't hide the flash of irritation. Dominic, she turned to him, forcing a puzzled smile. Why is the maid sitting at our table? And Dominic looked at her, and for one single second, his eyes went so cold that she had to swallow. Because I want her here. His voice stayed soft. But something enormous moved underneath every word. Is that a problem? No, Camilla said quickly, forcing a smile that came out more like a grimace. Of course not. Wren sat in the chair he'd pointed to, across from Rosalind, and the old woman gave her a small nod. It's all right. Everything is all right now. The meal began under a silence so tight it was hard to breathe. Servers brought the courses. Everyone ate without speaking. The only sound, the small clink of silver against porcelain. Julian was sweating through his shirt. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped his fork. He didn't dare look at Dominic. He didn't dare look at Camilla. He just stared down at his plate like it held the secret to staying alive. And Dominic broke the silence. With mild little questions, each one landing like a knife in a guilty heart, he asked about his trip, forcing Camilla to feign interest. He asked about Julian's work, forcing the man to answer in a shaking voice. He asked about his mother's health while he was away. And that question made Camilla go pale for 1 full second before she recovered. Cat and mouse. Except everyone at the table was a mouse, and they all knew it. They just didn't know how big the cat was yet. You know, Dominic said, turning his wineglass slowly by the stem, I've been thinking about loyalty lately. Camilla's smile stayed fixed. Loyalty. It's a rare thing. He watched the wine catch the candlelight. You spend years building trust, and then one day you find out. It was never there at all. It was just a very good performance. Julian's fork stopped moving. It's a grim way to think, my love, Camilla said. Light. Careful, is it? Dominic looked at her and smiled. I think it's just honest. He let the word sit there. In the middle of the table, between the roses and the candles, honest. And Camilla, who had spent 5 years being anything but, felt the first cold finger of real fear move up her spine. When the main course ended, Dominic rose, slowly, a glass of red wine in his hand. Every eye turned to him. I have something to share with all of you tonight, he said, his voice carrying through the silent room. A little celebration. Of honesty, a chill went down Camilla's spine. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. But before she could say a word, before she could do a single thing, Dominic pressed a button on the small remote in his hand. The television on the far wall lit up, and the first image that appeared turned Camilla's blood to ice. It was her and Julian wrapped around each other in the center of the grand hall, in the exact spot where Dominic had gone down on one knee 6 months before. Camilla went white as death. Julian's fork clattered to the floor, the sound ringing out in the deadly quiet, and Dominic just stood there, wearing a smile as cold as a winter grave, his eyes burning the two of them. The video kept playing, and he didn't need to say a word. The images told the whole story by themselves. The next scene. Camilla in Rosalind's room, her face twisted with hate, screaming at a 70-year-old woman. You think you're important, you old woman. You're just an obstacle. A burden, her own voice. Playing back in the dead quiet room, the real Camilla, the one at the table, went paler and paler, like all the blood was draining out of her body and pooling somewhere on the floor. She wanted to explain, but the video showed no mercy. The scene changed. Camilla knocking the pill tray to the floor, then slapping Rosalind across the face. Save your pity for yourself. Ren lifted her eyes to the screen, and her heart clenched, watching Rosalind be treated that way all over again. But Rosalind sat still in her wheelchair, face calm, as if she'd been bracing for this exact moment for a very long time. The video went on. Camilla slapping Ren, hard, in the old woman's room. You're a servant. Know your place. Camilla began to tremble. Her hands clenched the napkin in her lap, trying to hold back the panic clawing up her throat. But it didn't stop. The scene changed again. Camilla and Julian on the velvet sofa, planning to strip Dominic of everything he owned, then discussing how to have Rosalind declared incompetent, locked away, out of sight, out of mind. And then, the line that froze the entire room solid, accidents happen all the time. Camilla's own voice, laughing, cold and sharp. And that was when Julian broke. He couldn't take another second. He sprang up so fast his chair crashed backward onto the marble, and he lunged for the door. And at that exact moment, the dining room doors opened. Silas walked in, followed by 6 large men in black. Faces cut from stone, they moved fast, spread out, sealed every exit, filled every doorway. Julian stopped short, like a deer in headlights, face white as paper. And Camilla looked around, and understood, completely, that she was trapped, that every door was blocked, that the game she'd run for 5 years had just ended in the space of a single video. And then something happened that Dominic had been waiting for, because a cornered rat doesn't beg first. A cornered rat reaches for a weapon. Julian's shaking hand went into his jacket and came out with the small drive, the one he'd copied in the study, the one full of Camilla's crimes, his card, his last clever card, the one he'd been saving to save himself. I have evidence, Julian blurted, his voice cracking, on her. All of it. Every crime is hers. She planned everything. She forced me. I have proof. I'll give you everything. Just let me walk out that door. And I hand you the woman who tried to kill you." Camilla's head snapped toward him. "You," she breathed. "You were recording me." "Shut up," Julian hissed. "You did this. All of it was you. You forged his signature. You moved his money because you told me to." "I never held the pen, Julian. You held everything else, and they went at each other. Right there, in front of the man they'd tried to destroy. Two rats in a corner, each one trying to shove the other into the trap first. Snarling, spitting, every secret between them tumbling out into the open air, and Dominic, at the head of the table, simply watched and let them, because there was nothing they could say now that he didn't already know. And every word out of their mouths just tied the knot tighter around both their throats when they finally ran out of venom. When they stood there, panting, hating each other, hating themselves, Dominic spoke, quietly, and the room went still to hear him. "Julian," he looked at the drive in the man's shaking hand. "You think that's your ticket out?" "That little drive." Julian said nothing. "There's a camera in that study," Dominic said. "There's a camera in every room of this house. I watched you copy those files. I heard you on the phone that night. I know you were building a case against her to save your own skin. I know you were ready to sell her the second the floor gave way." He tilted his head. "So here's what you've actually done. You've handed me a signed confession. In your own voice, admitting you knew every crime, recorded every crime, and planned to profit from every crime. You didn't bring me a weapon, Julian." He let the silence stretch. "You brought me a rope. And you tied it yourself." Julian's face collapsed, and the drive slipped from his fingers and hit the marble, and skittered to a stop at Silas's feet. Camilla couldn't hold herself up anymore. Her legs went out from under her, and she sank to the floor, sobbing. Big theatrical sobs that Dominic had once found so convincing and now saw for exactly what they were, performance. Even now, even at the end, she was performing. She crawled toward him, across the marble, and grabbed at the leg of his trousers like a beggar. "Dominic, please, please, I can explain. I love you, I really do love you." Everything else it was Julian. It was Dominic looked down at her, with the flat, cold stare a man gives an insect on the sidewalk. "Love," he said. "You don't even know what the word means." He stepped back, pulled his leg from her grip like her touch was something filthy, and then, as if everything she'd already lost wasn't quite enough, he delivered the last blow. "Oh, and one more thing." He looked down at her. "I know you're not Camilla Ashford." Camilla went completely still, her head lifted, slowly, and the horror that spread across her face was the first real thing Dominic had ever seen her feel. Every last drop of color drained away, until her face was the pale gray of a corpse. "The real Camilla Ashford," Dominic said, "died in a car accident in Europe 5 years ago. The Ashfords kept it quiet, and you saw an opening, and you crawled into a dead woman's name like a hermit crab into an empty shell." "How?" she whispered. "How could you, Camilla Vos?" He said the real name like a sentence. "Daughter of a conman from Chicago, trained since childhood to lie, to forge, to steal. That's who's been sleeping in my house. Not an heiress, a grifter, a fraud, a nobody wearing a dead girl's clothes. And Camilla Vos, the woman with 100 masks and not one true face, could not even cry anymore. She just sat there on the floor, mouth open, no sound coming out, like a fish thrown onto the shore, gasping at a world it was never meant to survive in. 5 years. 5 years of building the perfect mask gone. In a single night, in the space of one dinner, Julian saw it all come apart, and he understood there was no escape, so he did the only thing left to a coward. He dropped to his knees, hands pressed together like a man at prayer, and he began to spill everything. The money moved overseas, the accounts, the forged papers, the doctor they'd meant to pay, every plan, every scheme. Tears and snot running down his face while he begged for his life. Dominic didn't even look at him. He gave one short command. Voice cold and final. "Take them both. They're going to learn what it means to betray this family." Silas nodded, signaled his men. 2 of them hauled Julian to his feet. He didn't resist. He only sobbed and pleaded as they dragged him toward the doors. 2 more moved in on Camilla, seized her arms, pulled her upright. And now the despair turned to something else. Rage. She thrashed, screamed, fought to wrench herself free, and as they dragged her past the spot where Ren stood, she twisted her head around, eyes red and wild with hatred. "This isn't over," she shrieked. "You hear me? I'll destroy you. I'll—" Ren didn't speak, she just stood there, still, and watched the woman being dragged away. With calm, clear eyes, no fear, no hate. Just a strange, deep peace settling over her like the first snow of winter, and then Camilla was gone, hauled out into the night, her screams fading down the drive, and the great dining room fell silent. The candles still burned, the roses still stood in their crystal vase. And Dominic Castellano walked around the long table, to where Wren stood, and the voice that had been ice only a moment ago went soft. "It's over," he said. "She'll never hurt anyone again." He didn't kill them. Silas asked him, later that night, why not? Why let them breathe? And Dominic gave a cold, small smile and said the truth. Death is too easy, because in his world a bullet was a mercy, a door out, an ending. And he did not want to give them an ending. He wanted them to live, so he took it all instead. Every dollar Julian had moved, he clawed back from the overseas accounts before the ink was dry. Every asset they'd tried to steal, he reclaimed. And then he did the crueler thing. He made a few phone calls to the right people, in the right circles. And by the end of the week, every family in New York's high society knew that the woman who'd nearly married Dominic Castellano was a fraud named Vos, a con artist, a grifter in a dead girl's dress. And in a world that runs on names and faces and who your people are, Camilla Vos no longer had any of it. No name to hide behind, no door that would open to her, not in this city. Not in any city the Castellano family touched. She vanished into the country's gray edges, nameless, penniless. Exactly what she'd been before she started. Except now she knew what she'd lost, and that knowing would follow her every day for the rest of her life. Julian met a quieter end. His confession, recorded in his own voice, went to the right authorities. The forged signatures, the stolen millions. He'd built his own cell, one lie at a time, and now he'd live in it. And the house grew quiet. But it was a different quiet now. Not the heavy, waiting quiet of the days when it had been full of lies. A lighter quiet, a clean one. Spring light came through the tall windows and lay warm on the marble. And for the first time in a very long time, the Castellano mansion felt like a home instead of a fortress. 1 week after that night of judgment, Dominic called Wren to his office. She stepped in with the old worry back in her eyes. Sure, she'd done something wrong. The office was vast, bookshelves to the ceiling, a massive oak desk that had always made her feel small. But today, Dominic sat behind it with a gentleness she'd never seen, and she felt a little less afraid. "From now on," he said, "you're not a caregiver anymore. You're family." Wren froze. Her eyes went wide. "I don't understand, Mr. Castellano. You'll have your own room, a real one, not the staff quarters. You'll eat with us, not serve us." He paused, looked into her eyes, "And please, call me Dominic." Wren opened her mouth to refuse, because she was used to the shadows, used to being the help, used to believing, deep down, that she didn't deserve good things. But at that moment, the office door opened and Rosalind appeared, in her wheelchair. A gentle smile on her lips. "Take it, my dear," the old woman said, soft, but certain. "You've earned it. You earned it 100 times over." Wren looked at Rosalind, then at Dominic. And the tears started to gather. "But that's not all," Dominic said, and there was a rare hesitation in his voice. Wren looked up. "Your brother," Dominic said. Owen. Wren jolted at the name, because she'd been trying so hard not to think about Owen all week, about the bills piling up, about the transplant she still had no idea how she'd ever afford, about the promise she'd made that she would not lose another one. "Every hospital bill has been paid," Dominic said. "He's been transferred to the best hospital in the country, and they found a match, a donor. The transplant happens in 2 weeks." Wren couldn't breathe. She stared at him, mouth open, no sound coming out. Owen was going to live. Her brother, the last one, the only family she had left in the world, was going to live. Who? She managed, her voice breaking. "Who did this?" Dominic didn't answer. He just gave a small, quiet smile and turned to look out the window, as if the question didn't matter. But Wren understood anyway. She knew exactly who had done it, and there were no words big enough, because no thank you ever invented could hold what she was feeling. Rosalind opened her arms, and Wren went to her, dropped to her knees beside the wheelchair, and let the old woman pull her in. "You're our family now, my daughter," Rosalind whispered, stroking her hair. "You always were. It just took the men in this house a while to see it." And Wren cried, not the sharp, broken tears of a girl watching her sister die. These were different. These were the tears of a person who has finally, after a lifetime, been let in from the cold. She'd lost her mother as a child, lost her father, lost her sister, but now she had found a family, a place where she belonged, and Dominic stood by the window, watching the two women hold each other, and a faint smile touched his mouth. An honest one, the kind he had forgotten how to make, because he'd done the right thing, not because he'd taken his revenge, but because he'd given a home to someone who had spent her whole life without one. In the weeks that followed, Dominic changed in ways even he didn't fully notice. He began spending more time at home. Fewer meetings, fewer late nights bent over a desk. Silas noted the shift and only smiled and said nothing. One early summer morning, when warm gold light filled the garden behind the mansion, Dominic stepped onto the balcony and saw Wren watering his mother's flowers. She wore a simple floral dress, her brown hair tied up high. She was smiling, talking to the flowers as if they could hear her, and her laugh carried up to him, easy and unguarded, in a way he had never once heard from her before. Dominic stood there, not wanting to break it. He just watched, and realized that for the first time in more years than he could count, he felt calm. Like every dark thing in his life went quiet the moment he saw her smile. Wren seemed to feel eyes on her. She turned, and her gaze met his from the balcony, and her cheeks flushed, and she quickly bent back down over the flowers. Not daring to look up again, Dominic smiled, a smile he didn't know he still had in him. Family dinners became a habit, not in the great formal dining room. In the warm kitchen, under soft yellow light, Dominic, Rosalind, Wren, the three of them, around a small table like a family that had always been one. One night, Dominic asked Wren about her life, about what she liked, about her dreams. Wren grew flustered, her hands fidgeting with her napkin, because no one had ever asked her those things. For 27 years, she'd known only work, endurance, survival. Dreams were a luxury she'd never let herself hold. "I've never really thought about dreams," she said quietly. Not complaining, just telling the truth. "I've been too busy surviving." Dominic looked at her, and his eyes were gentle in a way only his mother had ever seen. "Then it's time you started," he said it like a promise. A month passed. Owen got his transplant, and it went well, and he began to recover, growing stronger every day. Wren was happier than she'd ever been, watching her brother smile, hearing his voice come back to life over the phone. But Dominic noticed something, that even in her happiness, there was still a sorrow deep in her brown eyes that never fully left, an old wound that had never healed, and he knew that wound had a name: Josie. So one weekend afternoon, when warm gold light filled the mansion, Dominic came to Wren with an offer. "There's somewhere I want to take you today." She was surprised, but she nodded because she'd learned to trust him. The black Rolls Royce glided out of the city, away from the noise, toward the quieter edges of the suburbs. Wren watched through the window, not knowing where they were going, not asking, because she trusted him. When the car stopped, she looked out, and her heart missed a beat. A cemetery. Rows of white headstones resting in silence beneath old oak trees. She turned to Dominic, her eyes full of questions and a flicker of worry. He didn't explain. He stepped out, came around to her side, opened her door, and in his hand was a bouquet of pure white flowers she hadn't seen him bring. He took her hand and led her along pale gravel paths past quiet stones, until they stopped in front of a small grave beneath the shadow of a cherry tree. Wren read the name, and her knees nearly gave out. Josie Holloway, beloved sister, forever 8 years old, her sister, the 8-year-old who had died in her arms 10 years ago. The grave she hadn't been able to visit in years, because it was far, because she was poor, because every dollar she'd ever earned had gone to keeping the living alive. "How?" Wren whispered, her voice catching. "How did you know?" "I know everything about you, Wren," Dominic said, gentle, full of something that ached, including the sister you lost. He knelt in front of the small grave and laid the white flowers on the green grass. And then he did the thing that broke her wide open. He spoke to the grave, as if the little girl were right there, listening. "Hi, Josie. My name is Dominic," his voice low, rough. "I want to thank you for sending your sister to my family. She saved my mother, and I think maybe she saved me too." No one had remembered Josie in 10 years. No one but Wren. No one had ever spoken about her little sister as if she still existed, as if she'd ever mattered. But Dominic did. And Wren cried, not the sharp, tearing tears of 10 years ago when Josie took her last breath in her arms. These were tears of healing, of finally being understood, of having someone at last, help carry a grief she'd hauled alone for a decade. Dominic rose, turned and saw her crying, and knelt beside her and lifted his hand, and wiped the tears from her cheeks with a tenderness she didn't know a man like him could hold. And there, beneath the cherry tree, with Josie as witness, he said the words he'd been holding for weeks, Ren. I don't know how to love. I've lived in the dark so long, I forgot what light even looks like. His voice dropped, raw, trembling in a way that was rare in a man that powerful. But when you smile, the dark in me goes quiet, and when you cry, I want to tear the whole world apart just to make you smile again. His eyes never left her tear-filled ones. You're the light I don't deserve. But I swear to you, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it. Ren looked at him through her tears, and in her eyes there was no sorrow left, only love. A gratitude too big for words. You don't have to be worthy, Dominic, her voice, a whisper on the wind. You just have to stay. And every wall he'd built came down at once. He bent down, and his lips met hers. That first kiss was gentle as breath, sweet as morning light, deep as everything they'd both survived to reach it. Two broken people, finding each other in a world full of lies. Right beside the grave of the little girl who'd started it all. 1 year later, they stood facing each other in that same garden behind the mansion. It wasn't the wedding of the century Dominic had once planned with Camilla. No hundreds of guests, no obscene gown, no lavish show. Just a small ceremony under a tree in full bloom. White wooden chairs in 2 neat rows. White ribbons drifting in the breeze. Rosalind sat in the front row, in a pale blue dress, tears of happiness sliding down her cheeks as she watched her son stand beneath the flowered arch, and beside her sat Owen. Healthy now, full of life after his transplant, smiling at his sister with undisguised pride. Silas stood behind Dominic as best man, and for the first time in 20 years of serving the Castellano family, the cold man wore a real smile. Ren walked down the aisle scattered with white petals, and Dominic thought she was the most beautiful woman the world had ever made. A simple white dress, no diamonds, no designer name, but perfect on her. In her hands, a small bouquet of white flowers, the kind Josie had loved best. They spoke their vows, and then Rosalind was asked to say a few words. She sat in her wheelchair, her voice trembling with emotion, but carrying clear through the quiet garden. I told my son to watch how someone treats me when they think no one is looking. She paused, and looked at Ren with eyes full of love. You did, and you didn't find a princess. You found something far better. A warrior with a gentle heart. She smiled. Ren, welcome to our family. You always belonged here, Ren cried. Owen cried, and even Dominic felt his eyes sting. After the ceremony, while the small crowd chatted happily in the garden, Dominic went to his mother and held her tight. Thank you, Mom. For everything, Rosalind smiled, and patted his back the way she had when he was a boy. I only showed you the door, she whispered. You're the one who walked through it. Late that night, when silver moonlight filled the New York sky, Dominic and Ren stood on the rooftop of the mansion. From the living room below came the sound of laughter. Owen and Rosalind, playing cards together, as if they'd been grandmother and grandson for a lifetime. The sound was warm and strangely peaceful, as if this mansion, once so full of darkness and lies, had finally been filled with something else instead. Ren leaned against the railing, looking out at the glittering city. And she knew, after 27 years of being lost, that she had finally found where she belonged. Thank you for saving me, Dominic, she whispered. He turned to her, and the moonlight softened the hard lines of the man he'd been. No, Ren, his voice low. Honest, you're the one who saved me. Ren rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steadiness and warmth of the man she loved. Then let's be each other's light, she whispered. For as long as we both get to stand here, Dominic kissed her forehead. For as long as we get, he said. And down below, the cards shuffled, and an old woman laughed, and a boy who was going to live laughed with her, and 2 people stood on a rooftop above it all, holding on. 2 shapes folded into one beneath the moon, looking out over a city gone quiet with sleep, and for once, for the first time in either of their hard lives, neither of them was standing there alone.